The last house before the water. The drive out to the Callaway property took 40 minutes longer than the map application had promised, which was the first indication that the map application had never actually been there. Nora watched the road narrow in her headlights. It had started as a proper road, 2 painted lanes, a guardrail on the riverside, the occasional reflective marker catching her beams like animal eyes in the dark. Then the paint faded, then the guardrail ended, then the road simply became a strip of asphalt that someone had laid down decades ago with the best of intentions, in which the land had been slowly, methodically reclaiming ever since. Grass pushed through the cracks, the tree line pressed closer. The asphalt gave way at the edges to gravel and then to soft earth, and Nora's car made a sound every time the suspension found a new irregularity, which was often. She had the window cracked an inch. The air that came in was cold, in a way that surprised her. Not sharp, not biting, but heavy, damp and organic and thick with the smell of standing water and old leaves. The smell of a place that didn't drain properly. The smell of somewhere that the sun reached late in the morning and left early in the afternoon, where things grew soft and dark and took their time about everything. The GPS recalculated, then recalculated again, then displayed a small rotating circle for so long that she turned it off and drove by what little she could read of the landscape. The house came into view around a long curve that the headlights couldn't fully anticipate, and for a moment it simply materialized, solid and dark against the tree line, its outline familiar in the way of old houses that have been standing long enough to look inevitable. 2 stories, a wide porch that sagged very slightly on the left side, windows that were dark but present, set deep in the clapboard facade in a way that gave the face of the house a quality of heavy-lidded watching. There was a light above the front door, a bare yellow bulb in a corroded fixture that someone, at some point, had left on. It threw a circle of warmth onto the porch planks, and nothing beyond. Nora pulled the car to the edge of the gravel area that passed for a driveway and sat with the engine running for a moment. She had driven 4 hours to get here. She had the keys in her bag, given to her by the estate solicitor in a white envelope with her name written on it in someone else's careful handwriting. She had, in a small notebook in the glove box, a list of what needed documented before the property could be assessed. There were photographs to be taken. There were notes to be made. There was a job to be done, and she was good at her job, and she had done versions of it in houses exactly like this one, and come away with nothing but tired feet and an invoice to send. She knew all of this. She sat with the engine running anyway. The wind moved through the trees at the property's edge, and the sound it made was not unpleasant, a sustained low sound, like breathing through slightly parted lips. The circle of yellow light on the porch didn't waver. The house held its expression. Nora turned off the engine. The key to the front door was old enough to have weight to it, not a modern flat key, but something cut in an era when locks were more serious about themselves. It turned with a resistance that required her to apply steady, deliberate pressure, and then the bolt drew back with the sound like a single word spoken quietly in another room, and the door swung inward on hinges that were smooth and silent in a way that felt out of character with everything else. The hallway was dark. Her torch beam found the floor first. Wide pine boards, pale with age, marked by the geography of decades of use. Darker patches near the door where wet boots had stood. A worn channel down the center where feet had walked the same path enough times to leave their argument in the wood. The walls were papered in a pattern that once was repeating botanical, some kind of vine and small flower, that had faded to a nearly uniform gray beige, so that the pattern only revealed itself in certain angles of light, like something trying to reassemble itself from memory. She stepped inside, and and the house received her the way empty houses do. A slight shift in the air pressure as the door closed behind her. A new acoustic. The sound of the outside world, the wind, the trees, the distant suggestion of water, didn't disappear, but receded, muffled, replaced by the specific interior quiet of old walls and closed rooms. A quiet that was not silence. Old houses are never silent. They have too much invested in themselves for that. She moved the torch beam left and found the light switch. The overhead fixture produced a dim, warm glow from a single bulb that was either old or low wattage, and in its light, the hallway resolved into something she could properly see. A staircase on the right, its banister dark wood, with a newel post worn smooth at the top, where hands had gripped it for generations. A narrow table against the left wall, bare and dusty, with a dark rectangle on its surface where something had stood for long enough to leave the dust undisturbed beneath it. Nora opened her notebook and wrote the date, the time, 9:42, and a single word, intact. Because it was. That was the first thing she noted in every property, the degree to which it had stayed itself. Some empty houses went strange quickly, surrendered their character within months of being vacated. The walls seemed to go slack, the rooms lost their relationship to each other. You walked through them with the faint, unsettling feeling of visiting something in the process of forgetting what it was. This house had not done that. Standing in its hallway with the weak overhead light and the botanical wallpaper and the old pine floor, it felt like a house that was simply waiting, not abandoned, paused. She didn't examine that feeling too carefully. She wrote, intact, and moved on. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and it was the room that told her the most. It faced west, so in the morning it would be dim, but the window above the sink looked out toward the rear of the property and whatever lay beyond. And in the dark, the glass held only her own reflection in the thin, cold shine of the night outside. She kept her eyes on the room. The kitchen was someone's serious daily project, that was clear, in the way working kitchens make themselves clear, not in the decor or the finish, but in the arrangement of things. The cast iron pans hung on their hooks in descending size, each one seasoned to a dark matte black that took years to achieve. The wooden cutting board on the counter was scored with use in a way that documented thousands of meals. The herbs in the small ceramic pots on the windowsill, basil, rosemary, one she couldn't immediately identify, were dry now, brittle at the stems, but they had been cared for, and the pots were watered regularly enough to leave faint mineral rings on the sill. Nora stood in the kitchen in the center and looked at the rings on the sill for a moment. The estate solicitor had told her the house had been unoccupied for 11 months. 11 months since the last resident, an elderly woman Calloway, a distant relation to the estate's beneficiary, who lived in a city 300 miles north and had, by all accounts, never visited the property, had, by the clinical phrasing of the probate paperwork, ceased to occupy the premises. 11 months since anyone had watered the herbs. The rings on the sill were very clean, very distinct, the kind of marks that accumulated slowly, watering by watering, and then stopped accumulating all at once. She wrote, kitchen, well-maintained, evidence of long-term daily use, herb pots, sill rings, personal. She paused, then added, felt in. She didn't know why she wrote that last phrase. It was not professional language, but standing in that kitchen at 9:49 in the evening, with the window above the sink showing her only darkness in her own face, it was the phrase that arrived. The house felt lived in. Not recently, not in any way she could point to, but deeply, persistently, the way a coat holds the shape of the person who wore it. She worked through the ground floor methodically. The sitting room was large, dominated by a stone fireplace on the north wall with a wooden mantel that held three things: a small clock that had stopped at 2:17, a smooth river stone that someone had kept for reasons she would never know, and a photograph in a dark frame that she turned toward her torch to examine. It showed a woman standing at the edge of water, a lake or a wide river, the light suggesting morning, with her back partly turned to the camera. She was wearing a pale coat. She was looking at something in the water, or at the water itself, and the image had the quality of having been taken without her full awareness, or perhaps with the understanding that she would not turn around. She set the photograph back carefully. The bookshelf along the east wall held 100 volumes, roughly, in no order she could immediately identify. Not alphabetical, not by subject, not by size, but there was an order she felt, if she could find it. She ran her finger along a row of spines. Natural history beside poetry, beside a dog-eared paperback thriller, beside something in a language she didn't recognize, its cover embossed with a bird she couldn't name. She had the strong, slightly irrational sense that the arrangement meant something to whoever had made it, that it was a private map of something. She did not try to read it. The sitting room had an armchair positioned near the window, not facing the fireplace, as you might expect, but turned slightly toward the glass, angled so that someone seated in it could see both the room and the outside world, or the dark, or whatever the outside presented. The fabric on the left arm was worn through to the weave. The right arm was barely marked. The imbalance of it, all that wear in one spot, all that time resting one arm and not the other, gave the chair the specificity of a portrait, a habit, a body. Nora sat in it for a moment, which was not something she normally did. She didn't examine why she was doing it. She sat in the chair that was angled toward the window and looked at the dark glass and the faint reflection of the sitting room behind her, and the room was very quiet, and outside the wind moved through the trees in that slow, even way. There was something outside. She didn't know what made her certain of it. Nothing had moved. The darkness beyond the glass was entirely still, but the certainty arrived fully formed and quiet, the way certainty sometimes does, without the drama of alarm, simply in knowledge, settling. Something outside, at the edge of what the window showed. She did not lean forward to look. She sat very still and kept her breathing level and watched the glass. After perhaps a minute, a shape in the far left edge of the reflection resolved from the general dark into something specific. The estate extended south toward what the estate documents listed as a small pond, and the land fell slightly in that direction, and the tree line there was broken by a gap through which the water should have been visible in daylight. At night, the gap was simply an absence, a place where the tree line stopped and the dark became a different quality of dark, open rather than closed. There was a figure in the gap, still, not moving, too far away and too dark for any detail beyond the outline of upright human proportion. She could not have said with certainty it was a person. She could not have said with certainty it was not. She remained in the chair. After another minute, she counted the seconds, measured and deliberate, the way you count when the act of counting is the only control available to you. The shape was no longer in the gap. She could not say it moved. It was simply no longer there in the way that it had been, and the gap in the trees was again simply an absence, and the dark beyond the glass was simply dark. Nora let out a breath, slow, even. She wrote in her notebook, "Sitting room, chair faces window, angled outward." Then, after a pause, she capped the pen and held it in her hand and looked at what she'd written and did not add anything else. She went upstairs at 10:20. The upper hallway was narrower than the lower, and the ceiling was lower too, and the combination gave it the quality of a place designed for a more private kind of movement, the late-night walk to a bathroom, the quiet transit between sleep and waking. The same botanical wallpaper, The same pine floor, though the boards up here were thinner and spoke more readily underfoot. A different register. 3 doors. She tried them in order. The first was a small room that had been used for storage, boxes carefully stacked, labeled in a handwriting she recognized from the estate documents as the old woman's own. The labels were detailed and specific in the way of someone who trusted that the boxes would be needed again eventually. Winter linens, lower shelf. Letters before the move. Garden, seeds, gloves, string. The second was a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and black and white hexagonal tile that was original to the house and in perfect condition. The tap over the tub dripped with great patience at intervals of roughly 12 seconds. She counted 3 drips before she closed the door. The third was the bedroom. The bed was made. She had not expected that. 11 months vacant, and the bed was made with a care that was almost formal. The covers pulled to the pillow centered, the whole surface exhibiting the smooth, deliberate geometry of someone who regarded the making of a bed as a small, daily act of respect toward the world. The nightstand held a glass of water, evaporated to a faint white residue at the bottom, and a book placed face down to hold a page, though how many months that page had been held, she couldn't say. She picked up the book, a collection of poetry, old and soft-covered, the spine nearly white with reading. The page it held was near the end. She looked at the poem on the open page, but did not read it. She set it back face down, keeping the page. The window in this room also faced west, toward the rear of the property. She stood to one side of it, as she had not let herself do downstairs, and looked out at an angle. The pond was visible from here. In the moonlight, the clouds had thinned while she was working through the house, and the half-moon was now present and useful. The water held a flat, gray shine. The gap in the tree line framed it. The land between the house and the water was open, and she could see it clearly. There was no one there. The water was still. The grass between the house and the pond bent uniformly in the slow wind. The gap in the trees showed nothing but the water and the dark beyond the water, and the sky above it, which was just beginning to show the first thin scattering of stars through the retreating cloud. Nora stood at the window for a long time. She was thinking about the chair angled toward the glass. She was thinking about the herb rings on the windowsill. She was thinking about the book held open to a page that had been waiting 11 months to be read. She was thinking about what it meant to leave a place in that state, not in the state of departure, with things put away and surfaces cleared, and the grammar of endings attended to, but in the state of a brief absence, in the state of someone who had simply gone to run an errand and had not come back. She thought about that, and she looked at the still water, and the moonlight spread itself thinly and evenly across the whole of the back property and showed her the unbroken grass in the trees and the gap where the pond began, and she stood there at the window until she had looked long enough that she was sure. Then she turned away from the glass. She collected her notebook and her torch and her bag from the floor where she had set them. She did not rush. She moved through the bedroom and into the hallway and down the stairs with a steady, measured pace, and she turned off the lights behind her as she went. In the kitchen, she paused. She stood at the window above the sink one more time and looked at her own reflection in the dark glass and at what the dark glass held behind her, the kitchen she was standing in, ordinary and still, and what the dark glass held beyond her reflection, where the property extended toward the water. She looked for a long time. Then she turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hallway and let herself out through the front door, and the lock engaged behind her with that same quiet sound, one word, spoken once, and she walked to her car in the circle of yellow light from the porch fixture and got in and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The house waited behind her. She could feel the shape of it without turning around. The porch light, the deep-set windows, the slight sag on the left. She opened her notebook to the last page she had written on and looked at what was there. The time, the date, her small accumulation of observations, the word intact, the phrase unprofessional, unexplained, felt in.
She held the pen over the page for a moment. Then she wrote, in the space below everything else, "Come back in daylight." She capped the pen and put the car in gear and drove back down the road the way she had come, and the trees pressed close on either side, and behind her, the single yellow bulb burned its patient circle on the porch of the house at the end of the road, and the property was quiet, and the pond caught the moonlight and held it, and the gap in the tree line was simply a gap, and the night continued in its slow, indifferent way long after her taillights had disappeared around the first curve and the sound of her engine had finally, fully gone.